Strategic bombers are expensive and are not worth building. You'll hear this over and over again from big-time YouTubers and the HOI4 community at large, and for seemingly good reasons. For every strat bomber that you produce, you can get 3 to 4 fighters, cast or light naval bombers, or 2 medium airframe planes. I'm not here to tell you that strat bombers are cheap. After all, I cannot argue against basic math. However, what I can share is that I found a way to use strategic bombers in a much more efficient manner, which potentially has the impact of changing the current Hearts of Iron 4 single and multiplayer meta. Watch the video until the end, pay attention, because I can guarantee the results will astound you, and I'm not just saying that because I want to bait you. So my idea was to test how and when to use strat bombers to make the most of them. As you might know, if you go down the strategic destruction doctrine tree, near the end it branches out into daytime bombing and nighttime bombing. You have to choose one of the two, but when you send these planes on a mission, by default it sends them to bomb during the day and night. So I was wondering, what was the best approach here? Daytime bombing, nighttime bombing, or a combo of the two? To figure it out, I set up a test where the UK bombs Western Germany for a period of 1 month or 31 days. On the UK side, we have 2,000 medium fighters that have this design, and 1,000 strategic bombers that have this design. 4 large bomb bays, 4 Type 3 engines, air-ground radar 1, radio navigation 2, and self-sealing tanks. I am restricting myself to 1940 tech. The only exception is air-ground radar 1, which is a 1941 tech, but as the UK and US, you can easily research this ahead of time. The bombers and heavy fighters will stay exactly the same throughout all my tests. This counts for the German planes too. On the German side, we have 2,000 defending light fighters with quad heavy MGs, dual cannons 1, 1940 engine, self-sealing tanks, armor plates, and a heavy MG turret. We only have 2,000 of them because I wanted to simulate a scenario where Germany is focusing on other fronts as well, such as the Soviets and the Balkans. If you're the USA and UK, at some point you should have the industry to have a numerical superiority during the war. So we'll do the tests for day bombing, night bombing, and several types of day and night combined bombing, which is the default option. Aside from changing the time at which we bomb, we're also going to change the day and night bombing doctrine paths here, and the air ministers, because we have an air safety minister that gives you a reduced accident chance, and then a night operations minister that gives you a night penalty reduction. Everything else stays equal on the UK side. So the tests we conduct will have 4 different difficulty levels. First, our air command will face only the 2,000 German fighters. In level 2, they will face the fighters and a level 4 radar installation which covers the entirety of Germany. In level 3, we remove the radar installation and our air force will face the 2,000 German fighters and full level 5 anti-aircraft installations throughout the entirety of the region that we bombed. So level 3 is fighters plus anti-aircraft to the max level with 1940 tech unlocked. Finally, we combine everything. 2,000 fighters against us, full anti-aircraft installations in the entire region, and the level 4 radar, which is going to be our most difficult and final level. Think of it as a nightmare mode. And just in case, I've added a whole bunch of extra factories to Germany, so we are sure to not run out of things to bomb. The way I'm measuring our success is the IC cost to buildings bombed ratio. So we're going to see how many planes we lose, transform that into how much industrial capacity was lost through the cost of each plane, and when we figure the IC cost, we divide it by the number of buildings bombed. Here, the lower the ratio is, the better, because you tend to lose a lot more airplanes compared to the buildings that you bomb. So the lower number means that we're doing better. I'm gonna give you an example and then we'll look at the spreadsheets as I've already done the calculations and the tests. Here we see that after a month of bombing, we have lost 235 fighters. If we multiply that by the cost of a single medium fighter, we get 13,982.5 industrial capacity lost. Then we take the numbers from our bombers. 133 bombers lost. We multiply that by 127, which is the cost of of our strategic bomber, and then you end up with 15,621. When we take one number and add it to the other, we get a total loss of 29,603.5. Then we divide this value by the enemy buildings bombed, 119.5, and we get a ratio that's 247.72. Ideally, you want this ratio to be as close to 1 as possible, because that will signify that you're doing a lot more damage compared to the lost industrial capacity and your lost planes. So the first 3 tests that I did were for the 24/7 bombing approach. We bombed during the entire day and night, and as you might know, we have within a day 2 daily cycles, 2 daily rounds where air combat happens, and 1 nightly round, so 3 times per day. We attacked all day, all night for a month, right? I made 3 separate tests here so we can see how the night reduction penalty that you can get from the Chief of the Air Force and the different doctrines affects the performance of the Strat bombers. First, I ran strategic destruction with the day bombing path and no night minister. Instead, we had the air accidents chance reduction minister, Edward Ellington. And we can see how the ratio goes from bad to worse with each increase of the difficulty level. We go from 139 at the beginning when we only face fighters to a massive 231 when we face fighters, anti-aircraft, and radar. The second test is again 24/7 bombing when we have the same strategic destruction path and with the night minister included. So here we have a night minister that reduces the night operations penalty. And you can see that when we face fighters only, our ratio is better than the first one, so 123 compared to 139. But here it gets worse, and much worse on all other 3 scenarios, meaning that our overall ratio across all difficulty levels is worse compared to the day bombing with no night ministers. Test number 3 is when I did the strategic destruction path, but with the night bombing path. So instead of going day bombing, we went night bombing and we applied the night bombing minister. And as you can see here, we have a slightly better than the first one ratio. Here the ratio is slightly worse. Here we have a slightly better result against anti-aircraft, but here it's much worse when you're facing fighters, anti-aircraft, and radar. We have 255 against 231. And again, the overall ratio on this one means that if you're going to bomb all day, 24/7, do it with day bombing and don't include the night minister. Include the minister that reduces your chances of air accidents. It seems to be the most effective approach. We can also draw some conclusions from each difficulty level that can help you when you're defending. What I learned is that if you're on the defensive, a single level 4 radar, or 2 of them, are an excellent investment to protect you from bombing. Why build 2 when you can cover the country with 1? Because if they target your radar, they only have 1 building to destroy to reduce your coverage massively. So it's a source of defensive power, but if it's a single source, it becomes a potential weakness. From my testing, I found out that radar can't be completely destroyed, only reduced to level 1, so build 2 or more radars where most of your industry is. While anti-aircraft is a more potent tool, it is a much bigger investment. It costs over 87,000 IC to cover the entire region of Western Germany with max level AA, while a single level 4 radar costs 13.5k IC. So be strategic as to where and how much anti-aircraft you build. Finally, anti-aircraft seems to benefit from radars as well, so use them both in combination with fighters to inflict the maximum damage. Next up, we have day-only bombing. Here we don't have any nighttime reductions from our doctrines and ministers, as we simply skip the night altogether. What's curious here is that day-only does not beat the combined approach everywhere. And when we're up against AA without radar, our ratio is worse compared to these 2. However, it still performs way better when it's against only radar, and in the nightmare mode when it faces fighters, radar, and AA at the same time. So its average ratio is lower and thus better than each of the all-day bombing scenarios. So even if you have components that reduce your night penalty, such as air-ground radar 1 and radio navigation 2, it is still not worth it to put your bombers on day and night bombing in any situation. You will do the most damage on day and night bombing, but you will also lose the most industrial capacity, and you want to reduce your losses as much as possible because these fighters and these strategic bombers cost a lot. So thus far, day-only bombing is our champion. However, we have one more contender, and this is night-only bombing. Do a drum roll on your desk and let's see the result in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just look at this. I realize you're looking at numbers on an Excel sheet, there's no champagne and fireworks, but what these numbers suggest is that nighttime bombing is better than the rest by a factor that's close to 3, meaning that on average you're going to lose almost 3 times fewer planes while doing almost the same damage. This is massive. Here, look at level 1. Every other scenario, we lose north of 17k, in some cases north of 20k. Our night-only bombing loses 4,000 IC, 404.1, make it 4.1. It's still 4 to 5 times better than the other scenarios. And the damage you do is 134. Granted, it's the lowest amount of damage that you do, but it's not much worse compared to the others. Here we see 138.8 during the daytime bombing, which happens twice a day, opposed to nighttime bombing, which happens once per day. Logic would suggest that with nighttime bombing, you would only be able to do 33% of the damage because you're only striking 1/3 of the time. But this is so far from the truth that it's amazing. To be honest, it's quite surprising to me. On level 1, you lose around 30 IC to damage one building. At level 2, you lose 32. All the rest are 137 or up, in most cases 151. At level 3, when you're up against the anti-aircraft guns and fighters, you lose 78, so it goes up, understandably. But see what the others are doing, from 171 to 186. It's not even a competition at this point. Nightmare mode, fighters, anti-aircraft, radar. You are losing 111 IC while all the rest are losing 228 or more, meaning that you're more than twice as effective compared to the others on the worst possible scenario. And your average ratio across all of these tests, all of these difficulty levels, is 63 compared to 170 plus on all the rest. Is that much of a difference enough for you to consider bombing the living hell out of your friends or the AI the next time you play? Shit, I lost an arm here. I would say yes, especially if you're playing with the UK and USA, which are perfect candidates for strategic bombings. Heck, you can even try this as the Soviets. Just reduce the enemy's lines to rubble behind the reach of their frontline fighters. You can ruin their already strained infrastructure and they won't even know what hit them. Because who the hell expects a Strat bomber built nowadays, right? They're the most vilified planes ever. And keep in mind that this changes the game for everyone, because when the allies do something, the Axis has to do something on the defense to react, otherwise they're going to get bombed back to the Stone Age. I dare say that this discovery is meta changing. Even if it isn't, I just showed you a way that you can bomb 2 to 3 times more effectively with strategic bombers. Now some of you might say, oh, I always knew that nighttime bombing was better than daytime bombing. However, did you know that it was that much better? Because this is the key question here. Knowing that A is better than B does not necessarily mean that you want to build strategic bombers, but knowing that A is so much better than B might change your mind sometimes. Before I go, I would like to give you a few more tips which can help you bomb more effectively and preserve your fighters and bombers. A good rule of thumb is to always wait for the Axis to attack the Soviet Union before you attempt any massive strategic bomber campaign. After all, they cannot have their airplanes, resources, and attention, if you're playing multiplayer, equal across the board. So whenever they have more things to think about, this is beneficial for you, as you can use the element of surprise and rain down destruction when they least expect it and when they're least prepared for it. Another thing that I would recommend is setting strategic bombing priorities from this button. As opposed to real life, strategic bombers in Hearts of Iron 4 tend to be very accurate, so you can set specific targets for them to hit. For me, the most important targets for you during the first months of the bombing will be radar stations, anti-aircraft guns, and airfields. These 3 targets will reduce the enemy's air detection, air defense, and by reducing the airfields, you can apply a stacking penalty that can become massive. For example, if you have a 25% penalty on an airfield, the airplanes there will do 50% reduced mission efficiency, meaning that you can halve the effective number of fighters that are up against you in the skies. So you can get an even bigger numerical superiority and do even more damage while receiving less at the same time. At the same time, I would also include bombing civilian factories, infrastructure, fuel depots, and refineries as well. So these 7 targets I suggest that you start off with. Why civilian factories? Bombing these will reduce the enemy's ability to repair all the other buildings that you bomb. Not to mention, it will prevent them from building new buildings in the first place. The same thing goes for infrastructure, with the added benefit that when you damage infrastructure, you will also reduce the resource gain from strategically important areas. Finally, bombing refineries will reduce the Axis rubber and fuel output, and bombing fuel depots will reduce the overall amount of fuel that they get, meaning that you make it more more likely for the Axis to run out of fuel, which is a massively bad penalty when they try to contest you in the air. In all honesty, I would leave military factories out of it for the first few months, because military factories only can produce when they have resources to produce. And here you are damaging the resources and the enemy's defenses. Once the defenses and once the resources and once the repair capabilities are damaged, you can continue bombing whatever. You can add military factories if you want. If you plan to invade mainland Europe from France, for example, you can also add damaging supply depots and railway installations. Because when you damage the railways and supply depots in Germany, this means that the German garrisons that are defending here will have a tougher time receiving supply, which makes them less effective defenders, meaning that you have an easier time with your naval invasions. This was only a small part of the air combat system of Hearts of Iron 4. If you want to learn everything about it and dominate the skies, the best guide on the internet is waiting for you right here. Watch it or Sally the Salamander gets it. It's a fake one. Don't worry, just watch the video.